So welcome everyone, and I know people are really still filtering in as I keep on clicking the admit button for this program. This is the fourth session of Unlocking the Archives, put on by our amazing and wonderful archivists. So we started off in Cincinnati and spoke about the founding of our synagogue and its connection to the Reform movement and its path towards eventually joining the movement, and some of its the strong women who organized sisterhood as well, and that Cincinnati connection. Then we learned a bit about Edmund Scheuer, which is the start of this good education. It was a maybe introduction to where education became so important at Holy Blossom Temple. This past week, we also had a lovely program and lecture by Howard Rogers. We learned about Maurice Eisendrath and that initial conversation around Zionism that took place when he arrived, and his conversation also around we could say Black Lives Matter, but that wasn't what it was at the time, but the Ku Klux Klan and their influence in this part of the world, and the amazing things and programs that he started. And now we're reaching towards another moment in Holy Blossom history, one which now, there were some, of course, who had Maurice Eisendrath memories to share, some with him in his last hours, and Heinz Warschauer, many of you studied with, taught with, and really had the chance to get to know and learn from. So we're moving into lived memory, which is always dangerous because people have different recollections and different stories to tell. And I want to make sure, I know Michael Cole also mentioned, our teacher for today, that our seventh session we've added specifically for story sharing and storytelling. So Michael Cole's going to give us more of a history and the jewels of the archive around Heinz. And we will have an opportunity to share those personal stories, but they might not be in this session right here. We might wait until the seventh session to get some of that sharing to take place. And as we go, continue to listen for those themes of the involvement of women, music, Reform Judaism, what Reform Judaism means at this time, as they weave in and out of our history of Holy Blossom Temple. So without any further ado, Michael Cole.
Thank you, Rabbi. I may share some personal recollections of Heinz. As you pointed out, I'm the first person in this series who actually knew the person about whom he or she is speaking. And I knew Heinz well, really from my days as this is, Howie, if you want to go to the outline. So that's Heinz, as we knew him, as I knew him. I'm going to give some personal reflections on Heinz. I then talk about his personality generally, and some biographical details, his contribution to Holy Blossom, his education director and curriculum development, his book, The History of Holy Blossom, and the conclusion, I hope, will be a bit of a nice surprise for you. Okay, we're going to go to personal reflections. And I knew Heinz well, really from the time I was in grade 2 at religious school, through post-confirmation at Holy Blossom. And I really knew him until in his last days, I and other friends sat with him by his bedside at Mount Sinai Hospital. And of course, I taught for him. I taught for him in religious school. I started off teaching in grade 9. When I came back from university at Western in London, Ontario, Heinz came up to me and said, "What grade would you like to teach?" I said, "Confirmation." He said, "What's your second choice?" I said, "Well, grade 9. He said, "Okay." So I taught grade 9 for a couple of years with rather limited success. And then I taught in the youth academy with some success. And then one evening at Slichot, it was just before the Slichot service and a reception, he sort of sidled up to me and said, "How would you like to teach an adult confirmation class. And your good friend Morley Pape will help you out leading it'll be Saturday mornings. You'll have a Shabbat service just for the class. Morley will help lead that, and you'll do the class. And I said, I accepted immediately. And it led to 4 years, really, of the most delightful teaching experience of my life. It was wonderful. And what I want you to know from that is that Heinz sort of looked at me and he saw that I would be good for teaching that class, much better than teaching grade 9 students. Although I was a career high school teacher, but I usually started in grade 10 and taught mostly grade 12, and in those days we had grade 13. But it illustrated, I think, Heinz's ability, which Rabbi Plaut once pointed out. He had a remarkable capacity to sense what his teachers would be good at and what they would succeed at. And he had a wonderful, as Rabbi Plaut said, he had a wonderful insight into just about everybody except himself. And there he was somewhat wanting. So I want to go to talk about his personality, because I really believe that a consideration of Heinz's contribution to Holy Blossom education really can't be separated from a consideration of Heinz himself and his unique, shall we say, larger than life personality. And you could almost say that a novelist couldn't invent him, except that a novelist did invent him, or at least reinvent him. Rick Salutin, one of his star pupils, and someone who I'll talk about a little later, wrote a novel called A Man of Little Faith. It's one of those romans à clef. Everyone in the novel is a real person, called by a different name. Heinz is called Oscar. Rabbi Plaut is called something else. Fackenheim something else, and so on. Everyone rushed to read the book when it came out to see if he or she was in it, and how he or she was portrayed. Rabbi Plaut didn't like the way he was portrayed, and really discouraged me from, I was going to review the book, as I did usually a yearly book review for Brotherhood Breakfast Club. And a couple of times I asked the author of the book in to be part of it. And Rabbi Plaut made very clear to me that he didn't think that was a good idea, and so it never happened. But it was an interesting book, and I thought, unlike Rabbi Plaut, I thought that Heinz was really nailed to a T in that book. I think Rick got it right. Rick, by the way, was my confirmation teacher, and he was marvelous. But he was one of Heinz's great disappointments. He was part of a class that Heinz thought that several of them, including Rick, would become rabbis. And when they didn't, and when they sort of went off from Judaism altogether and out into the wilderness, in Rick's case into sort of Marxism, Heinz was very disappointed and really thought that his life was less than a success. He had been a great failure, and I think was quite depressed by it. Although, those of us who knew these people thought, they really were influenced by Heinz in a very real way. Okay, I want to go to the obituary for Heinz, which you have up on the screen. This is Rabbi Plaut's obituary that appeared in the Canadian Jewish News. I'm going to read, you can't read it from there, I see it's a little blurry, but I'm going to read part of it for you. Here's what Rabbi Plaut had to say. Most people have a stereotype image of the Melamed, one who drills children in Hebrew and davening, tells pleasant biblical stories, or propounds specific religious doctrine, and would otherwise be classified as a harmless, nice guy. Heinz Warschauer was none of these, and he most certainly was not Mr. Nice Guy. Quite the contrary. He was an irascible bachelor and passionate Jewish educator, and was often totally unpredictable. One of the oft-repeated stories about him tells of a birthday party in his honor for which he never showed up. Rather than teach unquestioning faith, he taught its approaches and pathways, and considered doubt the handmaiden of truth. To him, the searching doubter was a more secure believer than the one whose faith had never undergone critical assessment. End of quote. And of course, there are risks in teaching critical thinking. You wind up producing a Rick Salutin who, thinks critically and then leaves, or almost leaves. Rick has a kind of complicated relationship with Judaism and with Holy Blossom, but there it is. There are two people who I'm going to ask to speak about Heinz. They are on interviews that I did with them. Both of them have now left us. But I did interviews with Henrietta Chesney and with Joe Cronick. Henrietta, of course, was president of Holy Blossom from 1974 to 76, was very active in religious education in just about every aspect of Holy Blossom. And Joe Cronick was the youth activities director in the 1950s and I believe early 60s. And here's some excerpts on Heinz that come from these interviews that I did with them.
Oh, well, Heinz was in a class by himself. He was difficult. He was brilliant. And his main purpose at Holy Blossom was to build the best school that was possible, and he achieved that. He achieved it. He was tough, and I think every teacher that you would interview would say the same thing. He was tough, but he had such high standards for himself that others respected him for that and tried to achieve those standards for themselves.
Working with Heinz Warschauer was probably one of the best things that could ever happen to me, because Heinz was very demanding, insistent about top quality of everything we did. As a result, we had an outstanding religious school, and I augmented it because I would have something available for kids to do as well as attend classes. He was so astute that one time it was his birthday, and we arranged to get tickets to see Lawrence of Arabia down, I guess, University Theater. And I said, well, come on over to my house, we'll have supper beforehand, and then we'll all go down to the theater together. Okay? Unbeknownst to him, I had invited some of the best teachers and a bunch of them to my place for dinner. He goes by on the street, I was on Warren Road there, and someone says to him, he says, he's passed by 3 times. He must have seen a few cars around, maybe even cars he recognized. He didn't come in. We come down there, and we set aside certain rows, and he's sitting right by the, right at the aisle seat, so we all have to pass him by. Hello, Heinz, we missed you. It's good to see you here. Because Heinz never wanted you to be able to do things for him. So he wouldn't come to the supper during the throne. It
was his birthday.
It was his birthday. Hello, Heinz. Everyone said, happy birthday. And he wouldn't accept it. But that was Heinz.
And the one thing that Heinz did, I believe, that you can't take away from him, is that he made his students proud Jews and proud Canadians. We were good friends. He used to tell me off once a week. Once in the middle of a room full of people, he said, "You are such a terrible person. I can't understand how you could have 2 such wonderful children." And that was just one thing he said, but there were a lot of people that heard him. And then when I was president, he would phone, maybe once every 2 weeks or so, and say, "I am resigning. I'm finished. I'm leaving." And we'd have a little chat, and I'd say, "Well, let me call you back in a couple of hours, and we'll see what you want to do." And so that went on, thank goodness, for the 2 years. He stayed longer than that. And when he retired, he left a void in our school, there's no question. And unfortunately, he didn't live too much longer after his retirement.
Okay. Now, if you go to the resume, I'm going to add a little something to that. His father was a physician and died before the Holocaust, died a natural death. You can see he was quite a bit older than Heinz. He was about almost 50 when Heinz was born. His mother, I don't know about her passing. I can't tell you, but I suspect it was before the Holocaust. He had a brother, Fritz, who's 12 years older, who lived all his life in Berlin. I don't know what he did for a living. He too was a bachelor and was deported from Berlin to Riga, where he was murdered during the Holocaust. So Heinz, when he came to Toronto, had no immediate family. He was educated in Berlin at university. I went, I think, to the University of Berlin, left before writing his doctoral dissertation, was a leader in the German Jewish youth movement in Berlin, and wrote for a number of newspapers and magazines, both Jewish and general. He visited Palestine in 1936 and wrote about the kibbutz movement for a German Jewish weekly. At some point, and I'm not sure exactly what years, he attended Leo Baeck's seminary in Berlin, took courses with Leo Baeck, talked about him frequently, but he left without being ordained. I don't know if he had that in mind when he entered or not. From 1936 to 1939, he went to Frankfurt, where he taught at a vocational school for Jewish teenagers, probably preparing them for immigration to Palestine. I think that was the idea. He was interrupted in 1938 after Kristallnacht. He was sent to Buchenwald for some months. He did speak about his experiences in Buchenwald and said that it probably helped to develop his cynical personality. He got out just in time to leave for England about 6 weeks before the war broke out. And he went there as an agricultural trainee and a superintendent at a youth Aliyah training camp in Kent. I think then, because when war broke out, he was now a German living in England. He and a number of other emigres were rounded up and sent as internees to Sherbrooke, Quebec, where he was there for about 2 years, along with people like Emil Fackenheim, Rabbi Albert Pappenheim, some of you may remember from B'nai Israel Beth David, Rabbi Irwin Shield, who was at Adath Israel for about 40 years. They were with him, and before they became rabbis, they were all very young men, and spent 2 years in Quebec at an internment camp. I think they were supposed to be making fishing nets and socks, but apparently they weren't very good at it. But they did spend a lot of time in intellectual discussion. He was let out in 1942. I think you have there his internment certificate, Howard, that you can show. And he lists his occupation as school teacher and his present occupation as a farm student. And one of the questions they ask is, do you want to be repatriated? I presume they meant to Germany, and he just said no. The penciled in parts are from Canada. The rest of it is from England. You'll notice it's a male enemy alien exemption from internment. But the exemption really didn't come about for 2 years, and that he spent in Canada. Back to the, there, right. He comes to Canada, and he's interned in 1942, and immediately goes to the University of Toronto, where he receives an MA in modern history and a Bachelor of Social Work. You notice he has no formal teaching training. Very interesting, but he does have a education in social work. At the same time, from 43 to 47, he's editor of Magazine Digest, which I have never seen. And he's a part-time teacher at Holy Blossom Temple. And he comes to the notice of the then school director, Basia Hunter, who once told me that he was a remarkable impressed her right away as a remarkable young man who they really had to cultivate. And she saw that really he was capable of succeeding her as the principal of the religious school, which he does in 1947. And the principal then becomes the director of education. It's a full-time job, which he keeps until his retirement. Oh, there's a picture of him that I want to show. There it is. That's taken in 1944. Most of us don't remember him as this young person. He's, his early 30s. I think it's a rather lovely picture of Heinz when he takes over as principal of the religious school. Some 47 to 76, he's director of education of Holy Blossom. He wins many awards for his educational leadership with the National Association of Temple Educators. He contributes to the Nelfty camps and so on. And we can talk about that a little later. Mark Hanshin would probably be able to speak to his contribution to camping as well as other things. He retires in 1976. There's a memorable retirement dinner with Gene Borowitz as the guest speaker. And while Rabbi Borowitz is speaking, the power goes out, the lights go off, we're cast into darkness, and we have to hold up a bunch of candles on either side of the rabbi so that he can complete his speech. And then he dies, as Henrietta mentioned, shortly after that in 1981. He was only 68. Some of us had the impression that he was actually a lot older, but he was only 68 at that time. Okay, want to go on and talk about his contribution to education at Holy Blossom. He had the good fortune to be the director of education in the years following World War II, during the time of Holy Blossom Temple's greatest period of growth. This was the era of the baby boomers. And so there were lots of kids who needed teaching. But people joined Holy Blossom, and I remember people telling me they joined Holy Blossom because of the religious school, not because it was, the Reform synagogue, not because it had the lowest dues. Anything. They joined for the religious school. It had the reputation of being the best religious school in town, Orthodox, conservative, Reform. Had a terrific reputation. We taught a lot more than Hebrew and holidays. We taught history. Heinz made sure that it got taught history, philosophy, Bible, comparative religion, music, and the quality of teachers and teacher training was first rate. The attitudinal education was really important. Heinz wanted to make sure that people felt good about being Jewish. And of course, we spoke about the critical thinking that Heinz encouraged in his teachers. All this was done in a 3-day-a-week, or 2 afternoon and morning. It went either Monday and Wednesday for Hebrew, or Tuesday and Thursday for Hebrew, and then Saturday or Sunday for a few hours for religious education, which was a lot less than my friends had. They went to a conservative or Orthodox, was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for Hebrew, and then a good part of Sunday for their religious training. We accomplished a lot more in a lot less time. Okay, I want to go to the next slide, which is proposed goals. In 1965, there was a large committee struck at Holy Blossom Temple by Henrietta Chesney to look at the goals for religious education at Holy Blossom. And it took 2 years before they actually presented the report in 1967. So the first slide here is the submission that Heinz made to the committee. Now, you can't read it, but I'll just read part of it. He typed everything himself. He said, the overall goal could simply be formulated as follows. It is the purpose of formal Jewish education to relate the Jewish child and teenager to the past and present of Judaism and its understanding of God, and to the Jewish people as part of mankind. He goes on. They call for the goals call for a far more knowledgeable teaching staff than is available at present, or could be made available quickly. To train this staff would be very costly indeed in terms of time and money, even if the people ready to undergo this training process could be found. They call for a larger and far more expensive staff than is now available. And he mentions a full-time librarian, a video AV technician, a full-time art staff, and so on. Then he goes on. The more we narrow our goal and seemingly exclude people from their right to call themselves Jews, the more hypocritical we would become. To ask teenagers who are constantly changing their ideas on everything to commit themselves firmly to specific beliefs is, in my view, in total opposition to what we believe we know about the psychology of adolescence. So, rather large goals, and he wonders, even at the time, whether those goals are attainable. Next slide. That was in 1965. In 1960, a little later, in 67, he comments on at a goals committee meeting. And this is interesting, I think. He says, if really our youngsters were to practice some of the things we might want to accomplish, be it more study, be it more observance, be it more social action, that then I think our community as a whole is not ready for it. Because basically, I think our parents want us to do a nice adjustment job. They want their children to be fit for living in this nice world of today. They should be Jewish, but fit in 110%. I submit to you that if we are really serious about what we want to do, that then our school cannot really, in all honesty, hope to accomplish just that. To bring about nice, well-adjusted children who never say the wrong thing, never do anything except go a few times a year to services and take a few courses. I think if we are really serious about this complete reawakening we have in mind, then we should also be honest about one thing. Our parent body, our congregation as a whole, like any other Reformed congregation in North America, would not necessarily be ready for it. But there is no question in my mind that, again, a living Judaism has to be the result of analyzing a given situation, measuring it by the idealism and the prophetic impulse which we might have, and look at it and say, this is where we are, this is how we are, this is who we are, and this is where we can get to. If we do this slowly and take some time with it, then these things will all fit in together. But our program is one which wants to give the child more than factual knowledge. It wants really to educate, and there are some youngsters we certainly have educated over the years, help to grow up to be better persons, better Jews, better Canadians, better human beings. And with this nice sentence, let me close. You'll notice the repetition of the word nice. It's almost not quite a curse word, but nice to him is, a kind of not very descriptive word, but it's what we want. And what he's really asking, I think, is what if we really succeed? What if we really succeed at what we want to do? Would our parents accept it? And he gives the example of a young girl in religious school who went off to one of the union camps and came back and told her parents that she wanted to be called by her Hebrew name. And her parents were outraged and came to Heinz and said, well, what are you doing? I mean, I send my kid to camp and this is what you give me. She comes back, she wants to be called by her Hebrew name. And that's just a minor example of what if we're more successful than our community is really ready for. And he wrestled with that. And he thought, what if we're successful? It's almost impossible to be successful because we don't have the teaching staff. They don't have enough knowledge. By the way, if you taught for Heinz, he thought you should be knowledgeable. He would send you mail. This was long before email. You'd get 3 or 4 days a week. You would get something in the mail from Heinz that was an article from a newspaper or a journal or something he just thought of that would make you more knowledgeable. Frequently, it was a half-hour read, and you were expected to know this for your next meeting with him or your next teaching session. He was constantly having staff development and staff development meetings and staff meetings and sending out this kind of thing because he thought that you should be really knowledgeable. But what if you're really successful? Is the community ready for it? And he was a little bit cynical about that. All right. I think that both of the documents that I showed you, one from 65, one from 67, show Heinz's philosophy of Jewish education and the difficulties he saw in achieving them. What were his other contributions? Well, he developed a student-teacher program, and it was, I think, really very successful because it was a 3 or 4 year program that you would be in the class of a master teacher for 3 or 4 years, and then you go on to be a teacher yourself. And I think he was pretty successful. He turned out a lot of really good teachers from his student teacher program. He did a lot in curriculum development, extensive adult education, and post-confirmant education. And as Henrietta noted, he put a lot on his teachers. He was very demanding of his teachers, but he gave them wide-ranging freedom while insisting that they be knowledgeable about what they were teaching and they had to insist on high standards from his students. I remember I had one student who was going to fail. This was grade 9. And I said, this kid is going to fail. He said, well, if he wants to go on to the next year, go on to confirmation, he has to take supplementary lessons. He has to, take remedial classes. He added later on, it was I who had to give these classes to him. So I found myself going over to his house on a Saturday evening. That was the only time he had. So I spent my Saturday evenings at no extra pay teaching this kid so he could pass my tests and go on to confirmation. High expectations. He hired interesting and capable teachers, not always from within the congregation or even from the Reform movement. And they included people like Emil Fackenheim, who was then a professor of philosophy at the University of Toronto. David Steinhauer, who I think was the first certified Jewish teacher in the public school system, the high school system. He was a French teacher in the city of Toronto, and later taught at the Ontario College of Education. Louis Greenspan, who was professor of philosophy, became professor of philosophy at McMaster University. Ben Schlesinger, who was a professor of social work at University of Toronto for many years. Bernie and Barbara Berger, who were longtime members of the congregation and active in many different ways. Ethel Rakes was for many years the head of the Hebrew department. And Esther Grant, who for decades was head of the primary department. And Heinz really left her alone. Heinz really didn't do well as a teacher of young kids, really young kids. And he left that pretty well in the hands of Esther Grant, who was a master teacher of young kids. And she developed a good part of the curriculum for those kids. Curriculum, Heinz's great strength was really curriculum development, and I think he developed a number of programs for the then UAHC, now the Union for Reform Judaism. Those curricula really reflected the post-war emphasis on universalism and peace. He developed a program in comparative religion, which was part of the grade 7 and 8 curriculum. It was considered kind of breaking new ground, and Heinz considered it one of his great successes because kids really enjoyed it. And it involved church visitations and churches coming to us. And it was kind of sexy, because none of the other kids in Toronto had that, but we did. And we had, visits to Roman Catholic cathedrals and so on. And it was really quite interesting. And as I say, he considered it one of his great successes. We had songs, music. Ben Steinberg taught the music course in those days. But I remember some of the songs, and some of you may remember. Close your eyes and point your finger on the map, just let it linger. Any place you point your finger to, there's someone with the same type of blood as you. England, China, or Alaska, Mexico, or Madagascar, Indonesia, Ireland, or Peru, there's someone with the same type of blood as you. That was the philosophy. Another one was, I'm proud to be me, but I also see you're just as proud to be you. We may look at things a bit differently, but lots of good people do. We didn't learn a lot of songs in Hebrew, but we learned those songs and they've remained with me. I memorized the words all these many years. There was an emphasis on Zionism. I can remember when we were raising funds for the Leo Baeck School in Haifa. As long ago as I can remember, it was a long-standing tradition to buy trees for Israel, particularly as Tu B'Shvat came along, and we had those. You remember those hard pieces of boxer that you break your teeth on. But there was a very definite Zionist component to our education, and it was actually a good part of our confirmation education. Louis Greenspan was my teacher for a whole course on Israel as part of our confirmation year. And of course, as I say, the Leo Baeck School in Haifa was a pet project of Heinz, and he was very active in raising funds for it. He visited it every year when he went to Israel. I think the director was a friend of his, actually, from Germany. History, of course, was Heinz's own preferred subject. He had his own education in modern history. He was an exemplary teacher of history, especially modern Jewish history, and more especially German Jewish history. And when he gave a class on Weimar Germany or the Holocaust years, it was actually really, you couldn't, your attention was rapt. He had the rapt attention of everyone. It was a really phenomenal lesson that he would teach with audiovisual aids and photographs and personal stories. He wasn't afraid to tell us about his upbringing in Weimar Germany. I remember his father was a physician. He told us a story of going to one of the cabarets. This was when Cabaret was the musical had come out. He said, yes, he visited one of those, cabarets early because his father was on call as a physician at one of them, took him along. And it was really quite remarkable. I also remember a lesson he gave. I was teaching at the time and in the senior division in grade 9. And it was the time of the Quebec crisis when the, Front de Libération Québec had kidnapped the Minister of Education, I think the Minister of Education in Quebec, Pierre Laporte, and the High Commissioner or Trade Commissioner from Great Britain. And we were really on edge. I mean, there was martial law, or the War Measures Act had been proclaimed. And Heinz decided that day in religious school, he was going to talk about that subject because it was on everyone's mind. And he was going to talk about terrorism and how terrorist cells worked and what we could expect and the whole nature of the crisis that was then in Canada. And it was a marvelous lesson. It was a riveting lesson. Heinz had done his homework. He knew all about not only terrorism in general and these terrorist cells, he knew about the Front de Libération de Québec and who was in charge of what unit, how they didn't know each other. And so it was a lesson that remained with me, all these years. It was a model class in contemporary events. He was a terrific teacher. If you had Heinz as your teacher, and he loved to teach, it was a real treat. What else can I say? Yes, he wrote a book called The History of Holy Blossom. It was written for grade 6 students. I happened to be in grade 6 the year that it came out. And I remember him with a little cart going around to each class in grade 6 and handing out these freshly minted copies of A History of Holy Blossom. That was our textbook. And he wrote it for grade 6 students. But we in the archives use it as a primary source all the time. He must have spent years developing it. He went out and searched the archives in New York. Some of what we know about our early years, 1850s at Holy Blossom, we've gotten from that book and from Heinz's research in the public archives in New York, in Ottawa, in Toronto, and elsewhere. It's a wonderful book. And the fact that it's written in language that grade 6 students can understand doesn't detract from its value at all. He never talked down to kids. He may have talked to them, including in this book, in language which grade 6 students would understand, but he never talked down to them, and he never talked down to anybody. And so it's a resource that we use constantly. It needs to be updated to the present, but we're waiting for someone to take on that task. We keep sort of looking at each other and saying, "Oh, who's going to do this?" But the years from 1856 of our founding up until, I guess it was about 1956 when he produced the book, it's an invaluable resource. Well, Henrietta said that Heinz's overriding objective was to produce proud Canadian Jews with the emphasis on both Canadian and Jews, and in this he succeeded. He never really felt that he succeeded. There was always that self-doubt that lingered in his mind, and he would bring it up frequently that he'd been a failure. But those of us who knew him don't think that he was. And now a little treat. Here is Heinz himself going to talk to us. This is a presentation that he made. He called it Curtains. It's the last meeting of the Religious Education Committee at which he was the Director of Education. So it's 1976.
My suggestion is this. Liberal Judaism always was Judaism plus liberalism, Judaism plus progress. I do not think that we can just withdraw within ourselves and give our youngsters what they really need. I don't say we should superimpose something, but there are things going which make people happier and more relaxed and more sure of themselves and more friendly to each other, a little bit less competitive. And if we could find ways and means of bringing these things in some fashion into our school, it would be just as helpful as some years ago the sex discussions led by Dr. Silverware in the confirmation class. These things change, but I'm really serious. Then also meditation could lead to prayer and to an understanding of it. Otherwise, the gates of prayer will be very interesting for 10 weeks. And then this will also be one of the books you look at and find wanting. Because I still found as a youngster, in my naivety, I was a very naive kid, I found somehow or other a certain faith that there's a God who will protect, maybe punishes. When I was 14, I began to lose it somehow, but I believed in the progress which somehow is connected with God. I had something even when I went to the Buchenwald concentration camp. I was very naive. And then prior to that, when I was really upset in 1936, I came back from Palestine. My father had died from natural causes, but I was on my own. That Spain had a war going on, the Nazis were getting closer, and I went to Rabbi Leo Back, and he pacified me with something which would not work today. He said, you know, we Jews have very old eyes. We have seen very much and we know. Hitler may have a temporary victory. Some of us may even die. But you cannot hold back the wheels of history. They do not go in Hitler's direction. And this sounds very trite today. To me, in 1936, it offered to me some direction. And the point I'm trying to make is that somehow or other, this is completely lacking in our school setting. The teachers haven't got it. I haven't really got it today. And therefore, the experiments are not just to be made only to make services nicer and the courses more interesting and more projects and more interviews with tape recorders to find out about ancestors. Some element to bring about real inner peace or happiness for youngsters, or at least a way to this, for youngsters who are in the turbulent years of adolescence, has to be found.
Okay, so I think you got most of what he was saying in spite of some of the background noise that we really couldn't eliminate. And you see here, he's still searching. He's at the end of his career, and I don't have the answers anymore. But we have to try something. And he was really talking just before this about transcendental meditation. He says, let's try it. If it brings people kind of happiness and kind of solace, why not try transcendental meditation? You have to think outside the box. So for those of you, of course, who knew Heinz, I hope that was a nice sort of nostalgic bit of memory, because that's the way he sounded. That was Heinz, both in his inimitable delivery, but also in the content. That's my presentation. I'm actually a little early. I thought I was going to run overtime. There still is some time. If we can see from a show of hands, how many of you, if we can go back to the regular view so I can see who's there. And I want to, by the way, I want to welcome Rabbi Splansky, the elder, Rabbi Donald Splansky, who's come all the way from Massachusetts to be with us virtually. Welcome, Rabbi Splansky. And if there's just a show of hands, and I can't see everyone on the screen because there's two screens. Now, how many of you did not know Heinz Warschauer? How many of you never met Heinz Warschauer? Oh, there's a few. Well, I hope this gave you some idea of what he was like. And when those of us who knew him talk about Heinz, and there's a kind of chortling because, well, that's Heinz. That was Heinz. Everyone knew Heinz. Have some idea of what we're talking about. And those of you who knew Heinz, I hope I haven't misrepresented him too much, that I tried to capture a bit of what he was to so many of us. I await your reaction. I'm just going to go to Mark Anshin first because he mentioned last week that Heinz was really his mentor. So if you have something to add, we'll give you a couple of minutes, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. This was wonderful. It was terrific. It brought back memories, almost tears to me. I grew up at Holy, as you know, I was born into the congregation and grew up under Heinz's tutelage. And I also taught for him after being a student for many years, right through confirmation and teaching at the temple. One of the things I think is really important about Heinz was his understanding of the relationship between informal and formal Jewish education. And early on in the late 50s, he began sending us to Jewish camps. And when the URJ started forming Oconomowoc and then the Eisner camp in Great Barrington, he developed a camp scholarship program where he encouraged and incented a lot of families and individuals to donate and develop camp scholarships. And many of us were sent by Heinz to the Union camps. In 1964, the year of my bar mitzvah, I and 12 other kids, he sent us to the Eisner camp in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And we all went on camp scholarships. And then years later, we went to other camps, to Osrui, and we went to Kutz Camp. He made sure that all of us went to Kutz Camp, who were going to be leaders in the youth program. He understood the importance of camping very early on. And he also understood the importance of youth activity, developing a youth activities program at Temple. And that's why Joe Cronick was hired as youth activities director. Gordy Wolf became a full-time youth director with Celia Stroh, who's now married to Rabbi Stroh, but at that time she was the secretary to Gordy. That was all Heinz is doing. And he understood also the importance of informal youth activities programming related to the religious school, that educational program that Michael spoke about. His idea was that when students come to religious school on Sundays, and in those days, some years we went Saturday, some days we went Sunday, but on the days we went on a Sunday, his idea was that we would stay. We would have lunch in the activity room, because by then the new wing had been built. We would have lunch, and we would develop, and we would break out into different club programs of our choosing. And he had a whole bunch of different club leaders doing all different things, because he wanted to make sure that those of us who were involved in students at the temple had an ongoing connection to Holy Blossom Temple, the building and the congregation and the community. And by doing that, he developed this youth activities program. He himself went to, as Michael referenced, went to Nelfty Camp every summer. He went to Kutz Camp many times. And I have here a photo. Can people see this? This is a photo that Heinz took of me minutes after I was elected first vice president of NIFTY at Kutz Camp. I was standing up against the wall. He always came to camp with a camera. He would take pictures all the time. And he shot this picture and sent it to me that time. And then a year later, when I was elected president of NIFTY, he was there as well. And it was important for him to be with the young people and with youth. And he always was there teaching us and being with us. As a teacher, he was always accessible. And I think Michael sort of referenced that, as you could always go to him. And in fact, at Temple, he had two offices. He had his main office in the religious school wing, the religious school office. But he also had a private office, a little cubbyhole office next to the entrance to the tower. And that's where he did his serious thinking and his serious studying. And if he wasn't in the religious school office, if he wasn't in his office in the religious school on the main floor, you'd find him upstairs next to the tower. So he was always accessible, and you could always approach him. He was an amazing man, and he had such vision. And we all miss him. He was really great. I could go on and on, but I'll leave it for now. Other than this is my copy of his book, The History of Holy Blossom, which was a second edition, 1969. And I also have a copy of Rick's book that Michael mentioned, which is, as he said, very controversial and not an easy read, really, if you loved Heinz. So that's all I want to say for now.
Someone earlier had, I see Murray, and all right, Murray Hart, and then Ann Dublin. You can't hear you, Murray. You're good. Unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I can share just a few personal memories to go back to inspired partly by what was said, to go back to the birthday idea. When I was youth group president, it was Heinz's 57th birthday. And we invited him to speak.
No, you have to.
Morning Shabbat,
Murray, I'm going to interrupt you. Some people may not know that Heinz 57 has a particular resonance for those.
That was where the story was going. We contacted Heinz Company and told them we were doing this, and they sent us a box of samples that we presented to Heinz on his 57th birthday. He did show up. He wasn't billed as a birthday party. He showed up to give a talk. We presented him this thing, and I do remember the violence with which he made the first cut in the cake. So he was Heinz. A different side when I was in the two more stories. When I was in the youth group, I won't mention names, but the president one year was having some serious. He was flunking out of school. He was having of the youth HBYC. He was having drug issues, and I wandered in the building one day, and he grabbed me and he said, "Did you know about so and so?" And he was very hurt that nobody had told him. And he immediately went to the parents, and the fix was put in. Some years after that, I was a graduate of the student teacher program, and I was teaching, like you, Michael. I taught grade 9. Grade 9 was modern Jewish history, which inevitably meant the Holocaust. And there were 4 grade 9 classes. One of the other ones was taught by Danny Gottlieb, who you might know as a rabbi. But I was the only one who dared invite Heinz in to the lesson to talk about the Weimar Republic and the lead up to Hitler. The first year I did it, he came in with his audio visuals and his magazines and he set everything up. And I wasn't really the greatest discipline. The kids were a bit unruly as he was setting up. So the next year I figured, okay, I'll do this again. And I had a bit of a seat work assignment to for them to do. He walked in the room, the heads are all down. I'm thinking, geez, you know, I'm doing pretty good. Unfortunately, that morning at the last minute, 2 or 3 teachers had called in without any warning and announced that they weren't coming, they were sick, and he was in a very bad mood. When he finished with the setup, with the Der Spiegel magazine with the nude picture of Josephine Baker on the cover and all the other stuff that he put up, he sort of, in that German style, like clicked his heels together, and when the kids didn't immediately pop up and heads come to attention, he said, well, if you're not interested, I'm leaving. And he left me with about an hour of unplanned class time, which we talked about my version of, you know, how he grew up and how he got to be who he was. A few years after that, a couple of years after that, I was in law school at Queens, and the little Orthodox synagogue in town had a breakoff group that was starting a little Reform congregation, which I believe still exists. And I offered to teach in the religious school, and I went to Heinz, and he helped me with original stuff different from what Holy Blossom. He helped me give them set up a whole curriculum. And then I called him and I said, you know, would you come out one Friday night and be the guest speaker? And he had all these conditions. He wouldn't stay at somebody's house. He wouldn't go to someone's house for a Friday night dinner. But he came, and I always felt that he did that for me. It was sort of making up for walking out on me that day. He's one of those people in life that touch you, and when they're gone, you miss them.
I must tell you about a recurring nightmare that I have every once in a while. It's, you know, just before I'm supposed to be in my religious school class, and I haven't prepared because I've been busy, you know, with my real job. It's teaching high school. Anyway, I haven't prepared for this class, and it's going to start in an hour or so. And I know that I can wing it. I've got enough knowledge, I've got enough experience, I can wing this class and the kids won't notice. But Heinz will notice. Heinz will know that I'm winging it and that I'm not prepared. And he will walk into my classroom as he was wont to do. And he would just, unannounced, walk into your classroom, and he might take it over, or he might sit at the back and then walk out and make clear that he was displeased. Anyway, I never get to teach the class. I wake up kind of in a cold sweat before any of this happens. But I'm deathly afraid that Heinz is going to find out that I'm not prepared. It's a interesting comment. Ann Dublin, you wanted to say something. You're going to have to unmute yourself first.
Yeah, well, thanks, Michael. This has been fascinating, and thanks for all the... I'm sorry?
You have about 60 seconds.
All right. So I have a question. You alluded to this. You said that Heinz's experiences in Buchenwald made him rather cynical. What other effect did the Holocaust or internment have on him, on his personality, on his way of doing things?
Well, it's hard to know because I didn't know him before, you know, the Holocaust. I didn't know him when he was growing up. He alluded once to his experience in Buchenwald, and this experience, he said there was a hanging. They were hanging someone, and they all had to come out and watch this hanging. And he said there was a man behind him, a Jewish man, who tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Could you stand aside so that I can get a clearer view? My view is obstructing my view." And he said that experience made him much more cynical about people in general. He said that. Heinz said that of this experience of this man wanting to get a better view of a hanging. What would he have been like had he not been through the Holocaust? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think, some of his personality was innate. And I remember seeing a picture of him taken actually as a young teenager at school. So this is like early years of the Weimar, late years of the Weimar Republic maybe. And he's standing and posing just like you see pictures of Heinz, I said, "That's Heinz." He was like that even then. So I think some of his personality was innate, was given, but some of it undoubtedly had to be affected by his experiences in Buchenwald and in the Holocaust generally, living under Hitler.
And the fact that his brother was killed during the Holocaust, probably other relatives.
I'm sure. Yes, I never heard him speak about his brother. It's
really
interesting, but yes.
Thank you.
There'll be an opportunity in 3 weeks? Next week, we're going to hear about social action and Rabbi Plaut and Rabbi Feinberg. And then the following week, we're going to hear about music at Holy Blossom, Follow the Organ. Always an interesting discussion about organs at Holy Blossom. And then the following week is going to be given over to you, to our audience, our class mates, to give their recollections about any aspect of Holy Blossom that they care to do. The floor will be given to you. Any other last comments, Rabbi Helfman?
Just to thank you, Michael, really for taking part of the veil off of Heinz Warschauer for some of us. His name is one which is built in the building of Holy Blossom, even the way the building was constructed in the past, and where offices were, and stories of how we walk around that building are all tied to Heinz. And so thank you for this really informative, interesting discussion of a very interesting man. And also a reminder to us that work at Jewish education still, of the giants that we walk behind and hopefully stand on the shoulders of. And I know that we have former presidents of our congregation here and vice presidents of education. And it's a reminder really of what we're aspiring to when we think of Jewish education. So thank you for that reminder, bringing up those memories and so many present, and putting the work in. And I know Howie as well to put that slideshow together.
Howie, thank you very much. Howie Rogers has put in tens of hours. I think he put in as much time on the technical aspects of this as I did, working on the content. So I owe him we all owe him a great deal of thanks for making those audio-visual aids accessible.
And there's a question about accessing prior lectures. They're all being put into the archives page of the website soon, we hope. They are recorded, and so as soon as that's up, we'll announce it and put it out there as well. But they're still actually. Yep, go ahead.
Sort of interrupt. They're actually also on YouTube, under Katie Goodman's account. I wonder if we can add that link to the page with this Zoom link. But if you search Katie Goodman, they should probably come up, and they're named as they are in the brochure about the event week by week.
And so they are up, but we're hoping to make it easier in one website to click through, and we'll get it up soon.
Good.
So thank you all for taking time to be with us, and thank you, Michael, and the whole team.
Thank you.